Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Political Forum. My name is Mike Jacobs, and Political Forum is your chance to meet and talk with local elected officials and those who are civically engaged right here in Chicago. Joining us tonight, Alderman Vasquez of the 40th Ward.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
So it's been about 10 months since your last time because we had you on right before the election.
That's right.
Night and day from then to now. I mean, you've gone through so much. And at that time, so we're going to get into that. But so, folks, now how do you get involved? Well, there's a couple of ways. First of all, there's a number at the bottom of the screen, 312-738-1060, 312-738-1060. If you have a question or comment, you can also be sure to tell folks and your friends they can watch us right here on CanTV 21, and they can also watch us on cantv.org/hotline, cantv.org/hotline. So get your questions to us, and we'll try to get to many of those questions as possible. Okay, so again, there's a ton of stuff to talk about. You just came out of City Council today.
Yep.
A lot of stuff happening. So let's get into that first.
Sure.
One of the things that came out of City Council was something about doing a study on whether LGBTQ businesses face discrimination. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I believe you co-sponsored. So talk about that, and where we stand on that.
Yeah, so the mayor introduced a resolution directing the Department of Procurement and other departments to start collecting data on the LGBTQ businesses in the city, right, to see where we're doing well, identify where we can do better. So, pretty simple resolution. As it was introduced in the committee, I didn't expect it, but there's a little bit of controversy because I think some folks were really concerned that if someone were to get a piece of the pie, so to speak, that it would cut from someone else's, right? So, fortunately, ultimately, it came out of that committee and into the city council because of how things were portrayed as far as how contentious the conversation was. I felt that I needed to say something today as a resolution was being presented. So I really talked about how, we need to think about intersectionality and how ultimately we all share a struggle, right? And it's unique to each person, each identity. But if we really think about that and identify with our own struggle, we should be advocating for all marginalized groups. And so that led to a much larger, even more contentious conversation on the council floor that ultimately led to the mayor to really share her story and kind of explain really like her passion and vulnerability and why it's important to do it. So it was.
I think what she said, like our children are watching, because it's really setting the example, not only for us, but also future generations.
Oh, absolutely, and really making the case that we can't be silent whenever we see injustice. It doesn't have to be just injustice that we feel directly. So I think it was a very important point to make, and I felt really proud being there in the moment.
Wonderful, yes. And another thing that came across, and this, I want to get your point on this. There's a new leader for the Chicago Department of Health. Mm-hmm. That was proved today. Allison Arwady.
Yep.
One of the things coming into this was that there was some concern because of all of the mental health facilities that closed, under the previous administration, and so there was concern if that was still going to be the case moving forward. So can you talk about that too?
Yeah. So a lot of us ran on reopening the mental health clinics after they've been closed by then Mayor Emanuel. So when Dr. Arwady was presented as the appointment to confirm, she had made statements that she thought it was a good idea that they were closed. So we had a lot of concern about that, and when she was first presented for appointment, for us to confirm the appointment, we asked all those questions and really wanted to find out what the plan for the city was going forward so that we were righting the wrongs of the past, so to speak. And we weren't getting a lot of answers, so ultimately we voted it down, so she was not confirmed initially. And then this month, she was brought back for us to talk through. And in that time, we were able to get more conversations about what the plan going forward for the city was. Mm-hmm. And although reopening the mental health clinics is not in the plan, that isn't on the commissioner more than the administration looking at what the resources were and how they wanted to go forward. So we had a lot of questions about what accountability would look like. How do we find our reporting? How do we know that we're moving things forward in a manner that it should be? And so I think we really asked for a lot of those accountability measures and felt more comfortable saying, you know what, the issue isn't the person more than the plan. So if she's going to be the one executing it, obviously she's very data driven. We just want to make sure we're in the know as things move forward. So there was more comfort in the appointment.
All right. So then another thing I got to talk about too, since January 1 is the legalization of marijuana that's in the city, and it's been now 2 weeks.
Yep.
Super high demand.
Very high demand.
I mean, and
no pun intended.
Yeah. Right, no, exactly. And besides that, too, also on top of it, there's always concern, too, well, what happens if, with operating a vehicle while impaired, and comparing the numbers from this year to last year, they're basically the same. In terms of the number of people who've been pulled over, whether or not it's been alcohol or whatever. So what's your take about this? About the first couple weeks.
Yeah, so I've been. It's not really a secret, but I've been very vocal about cannabis since we got elected because I knew it was going to be legal, and it's something I've had experience with and I consume. Right, so. Everyone kept making the case of like, oh, January 1st. It's going to be this insane rush and people are going to be reckless. And what I kept saying was, it is already occurring. Just because it's not legal on the books doesn't mean that people aren't consuming, aren't living their lives and doing it. So there wouldn't be this increased bump as if though people were waiting for January 1st, right? They're just waiting for legal on January 1st.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's something I don't believe there's like an uptick in smokers or however people consume. It's been there. We're just saying that now it's legitimate to be able to do it.
So what about the perception, though, like especially when we looked at the pictures that were in the local media about those who were applying to have these dispensaries, and there wasn't a lot of diversity.
Right.
And that is a big issue in terms when you're looking at the South and West Side communities. What can we do about that?
Totally. So I think first we've got to really understand how the law is crafted, right? And you've got to commend the state legislators because Illinois is the first state in the country to have had cannabis be legalized through its legislature as opposed to a referendum vote, which means all those legislators had to come to a consensus to get it over the finish line, so to speak. It's also the most social equity minded out of all the legislation because you've got 770 expungements, you've got programs that are developed or planned so that we get more social equity, more ownership, even the people who are, we've got a social equity applicant program. So one, you've got to give that credit. Understanding who actually owns the businesses now, it's people that have the capital to be able to have a brick and mortar, have security, and have the product. So it was always going to be, unfortunately, initially that contingent. But in the legislation, it's written that the taxes made off that revenue are what fund the social equity programs, and also that there's a year of the same thing we're talking with the LGBTQ, of collecting data to make sure that we can prove there's disparity. So when we do more targeted social equity initiatives, we're able to withstand legal challenge because we will have proven the disparity. So it's a lot of nuance. It's really hard to kind of like go over all the moving parts. But when you see the picture, right, in your gut, you understand that that's not just. Having said that, we need to go where the state has already created a strong foundation and push it further. We need to be able to have real public consumption, which isn't in the current law. It only allows it in tobacco shops and in dispensaries. And I think we need actual public consumption because if the only place people can smoke is in their home, and your landlord says we won't allow it,
exactly right,
then you're gonna be smoking in public. And on the South and West sides, interactions with law enforcement could lead to very dangerous consequences. And Chicago's very, unfortunately, unique because of our history of segregation. So we need more latitude to be able to account for that as a city. So I've been reaching out to the mayor's team and state legislators, hoping that we can all have these conversations together to get the latitude to do that.
Because also with public housing, they can't, no one can smoke inside. So people who live there, so they're actually endangering themselves by the law is legal, but they can't partake in it.
Well, and like your average person on the street doesn't know the ins and outs of the law. They just know it's legal on January 1st. So there's going to be people out in the parks or in other areas, and law enforcement has been trained to not, to not escalate the issues. But if you're pulling over some kid or you just say, hey, you know what, you can't have that out here, and that kid decides to be, I keep saying kid, if that person decides to be, smart-mouthed or angry because they view it as like, it's legal, why are you harassing me? The tension is going to escalate, and it's going to lead to really bad results in our city. Also, the other thing that I've mentioned is Lollapalooza. We are pretty certain people will be smoking cannabis out in public at Lollapalooza, so officers are going to have to turn a blind eye to that. But if a similar event occurred on the south or west side of our town, that would not be the case. So we really have to think through potential problems and make sure we can account for that.
What about also there's been some blowback about the taxes that are involved, but I think you kind of went into that, and that money is what's going towards programs, future programs,
That's right? Yeah, because what we've got to do is one, the social equity program in general, but we also got to teach folks who want to start businesses how to do so, right? True justice and restorative justice is taking, in my estimation, and we're not there yet, is taking folks that are part of the illicit market, your street dealers, and making it really convenient, easy for them to go legitimate. That is how you remove that as a crime and make our city safer. We can't say, oh, these players who got their licenses are fine because they can afford to do that and have the wherewithal, and because you don't, you're a criminal, right? We have to think of larger ways. So my hope is that we get there, and that our society and our city sees that, like, the sky's not falling. Let's move forward in a manner that actually is best for all of us.
All right, folks, you're watching Political Forum. My name is Mike Jacobs, and joining us tonight is Alderman Andre Vasquez of the 40th Ward. And I'll quickly show some information on how to get a hold of the Alderman. There it is. So his office is on Northwestern Avenue at 5620. You can also email at info@40thward.org, and the Ward phone number 773-654-1867. And then also, he's got a spiffy website. There it is right there. So there's many different ways you can get a hold of it, and also learn about what's going on in the ward. And also, you're pretty prolific on social media too. So there's a really easy way for people to get a hold of you and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I want to make sure people understand what the job is.
Right.
Right. Everyone's always like, what does my alderman do? What do they do? Yeah. And I thought that before I got elected. So I was like, you know what? Let's share all of it so people have an understanding and can better hold accountable their officials.
All right, so now let's get into that, because you've got a very interesting story, and a couple things ties into today. So as I said, it's been 10 months since you was last on as you're running for office, so you're a freshman alderman, just about to finish your first year. Mm-hmm. Talk about your history and what made you want to run.
Yeah, so I was a product of the city, right? Like, born and raised here. My parents were poor. They were Guatemalan immigrants. And living I was born in 79, so I lived in the 80s and the 90s. Because we were poor, we were getting priced out of different neighborhoods. We got priced out of 5 different neighborhoods. I went to 4 different public schools. I was a rapper for about 15 years, and I just worked retail for like my whole life, and ultimately got promoted enough to be an area manager in charge of the state of Illinois for AT&T for marketing. So I kind of had my career set, so to speak. I met my wife, and we had our 2 kids. Our daughter Avery is 6, and our son Parker's 5. And that led to me really thinking about, like, what happens when I'm gone, and what do I leave them with? And so I decided to take my talents to South Beach. No,
oh, that, but no, come on, now that really hits home, because I'm a Clevelander, and so you're bringing up a LeBron reference.
Sorry, that's fine. But I really thought about, like, if I'm going to focus my energy on anything, it should be something that's more beneficial for my family and, like, folks that have been through the experience I had been through. So that led to me sharing political stuff on social media, getting a chance to meet Bernie Sanders through that, and the fact that I was in a room with a presidential candidate led to me being inspired to go to Iowa, knock on doors, come to here, put together a fundraiser, and then through that become a community organizer. And over 3 years, we grew to have the amount of people in the 40th Ward that said, you should try and do this thing. And ultimately, we ran against a person who had been in office for 36 years and spent $1.5 million to try to win the election. And we were successful because we really grew a grassroots movement in the 40th Ward.
Yeah, so talk about, Bernie, because obviously Bernie once again is running this year, and just recently he's been in the news about about that little spat between himself and Elizabeth Warren. What's your take on that?
I think if you look at Bernie's track record, it's very clear that he has been advocating and really saying that a woman should be president and the possibility. So what was really funny, let's say, about the debate last night is there was a moment where Elizabeth Warren said, like, I'm the only one that's been able to knock out a Republican incumbent in 30 years. and Bernie Sanders, like, I did it in 30 years. I did it in 29 years.
Yeah.
And so that to me was very interesting because it was two people having a completely different perspective on a statement. And so it was very easy for me to look at it and go, I could see how people have different interpretations. What's really challenging is when you're a supporter and you feel like the media is against you and your candidate, you're going to have this outrage. And so what I've seen is a lot of really Bernie supporters, and I'm a Bernie supporter, I endorse Bernie, voicing that outrage and directing it at people. And so what I've been really trying to do on social media is say, look, if you really want to prove your point, go prove it on the field. Go knock on some doors, make some phone calls, donate, use that energy in a way that's productive so our candidate can win. Because ultimately, we all want to take out Donald Trump, and we need to come together once the primaries are over to be able to do that. And we're not going to do that effectively if we're sniping at each other.
Excellent point, because I completely agree with you, especially the media's all talking about the quote-unquote not handshake that could have been after the, it's like we need to get over that and really get to the point.
You just got to focus on the long game, right?
Yeah.
Like it's challenging. We're all human. We just have to keep focused on that because there's so much at stake.
So it looks like we have a caller. Caller, either do you have a question or comment for Alderman Vasquez?
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask the Alderman, or I guess maybe more express my opinion about something that I saw yesterday about the City Council that sort of concerned me. And I saw that there was an opportunity for the council to vote on settlements to Chicago residents who have been victims of police brutality. And I'm bothered by the fact that by voting on those settlements and setting aside money for those settlements, that we acknowledge that there's a certain amount of police brutality going on out there, and we're just going to pay for it and deal with it instead of really trying to eradicate it. I mean, especially if we're trying to do studies on discrimination, I think that we should take something like that more seriously, especially since we have a new consent decree. So I'm curious to kind of know how he feels about us even budgeting for this sort of thing and the message that sends residents who are concerned about being discriminated against or being attacked or harassed or even killed at the hands of police, that the city is just going to pay for it and make it go away, and they're not really interested in stopping it or keeping all citizens safe.
Excellent question.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I am, to be honest, very angry and conflicted about how things have been playing out. I'll explain why I'm conflicted, because I think that frames it better. Is that for all of these cases that we ultimately vote to settle on, you think about the people that have been wronged by law enforcement or whatever. Like, they are fighting to be basically paid justly for their trauma and their hurt.
Right.
And at the same time, the city council was looking at our fiduciary responsibility to taxpayers. So when these cases come, that's why a lot of them get voted for the settlement, because yeah, it's absolutely true that you've got people been fighting for years for this amount, and the lawyers say it is best that we settle as a city because it might be more damaging to the city. So it's a conflict there, especially in our role as like fiscal stewards for the city. At the same time, I'm absolutely angry at the fact that we don't do anything to solve the larger problem, that we think, hey, every time there's a settlement, it's like normal that we're just going to pay the settlement and wait for the next month. So what really incensed me, especially this month, was there was a case about an officer. There's a gentleman who had been arrested. He had his handcuffs, and he had figured out a way to get his cuffs in front of him. And so he's in a holding cell, and he's knocking. And the officer opens the door and just pushes him with as much force as possible. There's video of it. And the gentleman who was pushed flies back, hits his head, has brain damage, bleeding, bruising, right? And our accountability board, COPA, looked at it and said, well, we can't really tell if his hands were up or not, when it was very clear that the gentleman didn't lunge at anything, he was just pushed. We then found out that the officer that did that was also part of a case last month for the gentleman who happened to be in a gang and passed away, and there was found coke on him, right? So he's part of that case. And then there was another case he was a part of. So this officer had been there, and not only had been there, he was a field training officer, right? So that to me really infuriates me, because we're not taking police accountability seriously. So when we talk about CPAC having a Civilian Police Accountability Council or GAPA, we want civilians to be the ones calling those shots. But the larger problem, which we really have to focus on, is our deal with the Fraternal Order of the Police when it comes to the union agreements, because they're able to get away with so much. And here's interesting or funny to me. Throughout our first election, I was able to meet one of my predecessors. So before Alderman O'Connor, there was Alderman Ivan Rittenberg, and he had been, I believe, a sergeant or lieutenant with the police force. And so he talked to me. He said, you know, you got to tell people that if you're an officer, your job is justice, right? Your job is to make sure that you're being just, that you're enforcing laws. So if that's your job, it is incumbent upon you to make sure that your department is just. And clearly we don't have that. So the problem is the officers that are the bad players make the job difficult for those who just want to do the right thing. But we have a system in place where they're not even able to call out those folks because they're afraid of repercussions. So it's a much larger problem that we need to solve. And it is really infuriating. So my hope is that when we talk with the mayor's administration, that we come to something that really improves upon what we already have, so we can create a more just society where we're not being attacked, murdered just because of the color of our skin.
Right, and IG Ferguson, like his report is about to come out. It did not come out today, you know, about that, and then he mentioned the exact thing. Like, and this is difficult also for officers because, to your point, they're supposed to be supermen and women, right? They looked at as not batting an eye and doing the right thing,
right? And
sometimes that can be difficult, but at the same time you're held to a standard.
Well, and it's also challenging when we had a superintendent who wouldn't admit there was a code of silence,
right?
And ultimately, when he falls asleep behind the wheel because he'd been drinking and everything, you see the code of silence at play. Oh. Right, so people see that hypocrisy and really lose faith in the overall system. So if we want to restore any kind of faith between the community and the public servants entrusted to protect it, we have to be very frank about the problems.
That is exactly the transparency, being frank, and just, I think there's got to be an understanding that people are human at the same time, but there's got to be accountability.
Oh, absolutely. And officers are gonna have PTSD because look at what their job is. So they need mental health. They need all the services so they can have healthy and be better at decision making. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Thankfully, we have a consent decree, but we have to make sure that we're abiding by it and really taking it seriously. So I share the caller's frustration, and it's something that we will be fighting and advocating for.
Well, again, caller, thank you for that question. You know what? Like, we've got about 5 minutes left in the show. I'm going to get down to the 40th ward. What's been going on?
Sure.
So we've gotten into so much stuff. I told you guys there's a lot of stuff we're talking about today. So some of the things that you wanted to bring to the ward, straight from the get. What were some of those things, and have you been able to do it in the 10 months? Give us an update.
Yeah, I mean, our big thing was being accessible, transparent, and accountable government. So we've done a really, I think, an amazing job of doing that. So whenever we have any kind of zoning changes, we have community-driven processes to make sure neighbors have input and weigh in on what the judgment or decision will be. We make sure that everything we do, like you said, we're communicating it on social media so people have an understanding of what's going on. We're doing quarterly town halls in all 4 corners of the ward. And so that's been really amazing, being able to be responsive in delivering services. Now what I also want to work on is the economic development of the ward. I think we can use arts and culture to really invigorate some of the really strips in the ward that haven't had it for a while, like Lincoln Avenue from Foster to Peterson. So we're looking with the Department of Planning, Department of Special Events and Cultural Affairs, and CDOT to really figure out how can we do that, as well as looking, we also had a precinct partner, so we have neighbors that actually report to us what's going on in their neighborhood. We're developing a legislative team, so neighbors can volunteer and help draft policy with us. So we really want to do what was the main mission of the election, the race and coming into office, to open up government, and we will continue to do so.
Talk about also participatory budgeting. That's also something big, that you're trying to continue.
Yeah. So right now we've started the process by setting up a board that sets up the actual mechanisms for participatory budgeting process. So going forward in this year, we're going to have neighbors deciding on what we do with the 1.3 million to really invest in our ward. And yeah, I'm really proud. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to serve and take care of our neighbors, and we'll continue to bring government in that manner.
Another thing also, I know it's near and dear to you, is affordable housing. You know, we know already, you know, that the Chicago, you know, whether it's rent or trying to buy, you know, a home, that it can get rather expensive. And so it leaves out a big chunk of the community. So what are some things that you're trying to do for that?
So that's the thing that's really challenging at a ward level, right? Because when you look at your ward, you know, it depends how much land you actually have to build on. So some of the larger plots on the south and west side, where you've got a lot of vacant lots, there's opportunity to build that. Whereas we have like a lot of single family homes and a level of density there. So what we're looking at is whenever there's any opportunity that a developer wants to come build, our conversation is, you know, what affordable housing can you bring? So we try to push it to like 20% more, you know, right now it's 10% the minimum. We keep pushing for that. We've also been advocating for making affordable storefronts. So creating storefronts that are hybrids, meaning if you could live there and also have a storefront, so making those affordable. There's a lot more to do, and I think there's a much larger conversation at the city level of what law should do to make sure we bring more affordable housing. But we keep an eye on what land there is and what developments are coming to advocate every single time.
All right, so now I want to get back to City Council Day as we start to wrap up. There's something that you thought was really kind of cool that happened in City Council today, talking about Hamilton.
Yeah.
You know, and like you said, I think the quote was, you never heard some the word hip hop being used so many times in City Council chambers, right? Yeah,
I mean, like being somebody who was a hip hop artist, you know, and the way my election went, there was a lot of I had mixed feelings about it because as a hip-hop artist, there were a lot of things I said that were ignorant, right? So in the council, I don't really carry myself as like the rapper. I'm working for the people and doing my job. So to hear all the accolades and tribute for Hamilton and everyone talking about hip-hop, like I just had to stand up and say, it's really amazing to see it proven what you can do with the hip-hop culture to express so much more, and how much it's become not just a part of mainstream society, but a way we express history to each other and change society. So it was amazing to see that. And it was also pretty cool to not be the only rapper in the city council chambers at that time. So it was awesome. Although Walter Burnett was actually a rapper for a while, but it's a secret.
Yeah. So today, so the city just honored the run, the 171?
Yeah, because the 171 weeks that they had the run, and they are leaving. So we wanted to really celebrate and commemorate that, because really what it's done for our city being such a theater town, right? So yeah, I mean, that's city council meetings. It will be all of the above, and it's just a roller coaster ride, right?
So then lastly, we have about a minute left. You and Alderman Wagesback are looking at an ordinance talking about minimizing plastic, single-use plastic in the city. This is a big deal. You know, as that we're getting rid of the bags. You know, obviously, and a lot of people are really thinking about environment. Talk about that and the importance of it.
Yeah. So the ordinance calls for the ban of styrofoam completely. So that's also a piece of it. Yeah. But for single-use plastics, what it does what's really interesting about it is it changes the dynamic. So if you look at restaurants and establishments, typically they have all this like plastic, dinnerware out there, and you just grab whatever you're gonna do without thinking. What this does is it flips it on its head as we move towards eliminating it by not having it out there and so easily accessible that if you actually want one, you have to specifically ask for it, and that restaurants will have more utensils that are made from different materials that are biodegradable, that aren't single use. So it's a step in getting like our minds wrapped around it, and it helps us lead in the Midwest as it comes to sustainability.
Excellent, folks. How many times do you say, okay, you grab the utensils, but you have utensils at home?
Yeah.
And so you just immediately pitch it.
Yeah, you just grab it, right? Yeah. Or it's thrown in the bag. So I think sometimes in general, society gets a little careless and kind of just selfish in that. And so really having law in place to help curb that behavior is important for future generations that need our planet. Yeah. So.
All right, so I got about 20 seconds to wrap this up. So I want to thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure. Been watching Political Forum. Tune in every Wednesday at 7 p.m. as we have great guests. Next week, we have Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, so check us out then. Until next time, everyone, please have a good night.